Billy, thanks a lot for taking some time, man. I appreciate it. And congratulations on the release of the brand new album, ATUM. Just dropped the third act just a couple of weeks ago. And I'm curious, you've talked a lot in these interviews about this being a sequel to Melancholy, a sequel to Machina. I'm curious if, back in the mid-90s, this was sort of always the plan. Like, I'm going to drop a double album in the 90s, and then I'm going to follow that up 5 years later, and then watch out, like 20 years later, I'm going to drop this 33-song opus. Or is it more because of the environment and what's going on in the world that you decide, I want to revisit this sort of stuff?
It was more the environment. When we did Melancholy recording in 94, I didn't really tell the band we were doing a concept album. They only found out later. They weren't totally happy about the idea. Then when the band was breaking up in 1999, I said, I want to turn this into a concept album. I mapped out this whole idea, how we could basically be a band breaking up, why we broke up, sort of in almost like a cartoonish way. And they all agreed to it. And then, it didn't work out the way that I wanted. So the record was like a weird mixture of the concept and the actual reality of the band sort of splintering apart during the recording process. And then, when I approached my band members about doing this record about 4 or 5 years ago, they were not very enthusiastic. They thought it was too much to take on. So really, it was during the pandemic, I found myself with all this free time, and I thought, right, I'm going to do this record, and I'll ask for forgiveness later. And so, yeah, it was always a bit of happenstance, honestly.
What was the catalyst to tell the story of Shiny this time around? We had Zero on Melancholy and Glass on Machina, and then now 20 years later, what was it in the world that made you think, you know what, here's this idea, Shiny's going to be sent to space, he's a threat, they want to get rid of him. What sort of led you to go down that path?
Well, in 2007, when Jimmy and I brought the band back together, at least under that name with just the two of us, I wrote an album called Zeitgeist, which at the time people thought was too dark, too paranoid, too not friendly enough or something. and I pointed out that I thought the world was heading in a strange kind of technocratic direction. I talked commonly in 2007 about how we were being spied on. Everybody was being spied on by tech companies and the government. Everyone just kind of shrugged, Here we are in 2023. Now, all those subjects are routinely in the news, including AI and, kind of who runs the world, right? Even Elon Musk taking over Twitter. There's the furious debate going on about free speech and who should be able to talk or not talk and whether it should be tied into your bank account, all these crazy things. So I found myself over the last 15 to 20 years really grappling with what my responsibility is, not as a musician or rock star, but as just a human being. What is my responsibility to point out what I see coming? Because I'm a big believer in human rights. I'm a big believer in freedom of speech. I'm a big believer that if you empower the individual, that will always present you the best case in the world. Now, it's always going to be messy. It's not a perfect system, but overall, freedom has always been the greatest boon for humankind, in my estimation. And so, yeah, it's just, I guess, a reaction to, not so much my place in the world as a celebrity. It's my position in the place as just a human being.
It's interesting you mentioned AI and all that, because you look at a song like Empires, which is the latest single, and that focuses on a lot of those things. I also find it interesting that you're talking about these futuristic ideas and AI and technology and all that. And right before this album was released, a hacker gets in and steals these songs and holds them for ransom, threatens to leak them. It's interesting that you have this album with futuristic ideas when you're dealing with something in real life that is kind of futuristic, even though it's 2023.
Well, now, I mean, and just to extrapolate on from what you're saying, now we're going to deal with deep fake. Invariably, there's already issues with they're taking famous female celebrities and putting their heads on porn stars and leaking them as sex tapes. And, there's any number of crazy things that are about to happen. And the line between reality and let's call it surreality is going to get very, very blurry. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm not Chicken Little running around saying the sky is falling. I just asked the very simple question is this the world that everybody wants to live in? At the moment, it seems to be the world that everybody wants to live in. Everybody seems to be fine with the clickbait and the weirdness. And hopefully there will be a point where maybe everybody collectively decides that, we have to find a different way to coexist, because I think there's things coming down the road that we can't even imagine.
With this being this massive 33-song, 3 LP entity, there's going to be talk about you guys playing this at some point in its entirety at a show. Is there the possibility that ATUM will be like a one-night only in Chicago extravaganza? Is that something being discussed?
Yeah, I think I discussed it even when we were making the record. I think what I've always said is it would be good to go out and perform it with other singers so that I wouldn't sing every song and you could hear the characters voiced with different people. So I always mention, like, my buddy Gerard Way would be a perfect person to come on tour with the band for a week or so to perform, one of the characters, stuff like that. I think it would be really fun to have different casts perform the record at different times. It's a lot of music. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes, but that's kind of, in many ways, that's the length of a good old fashioned concert. So I think it's doable musically. I think it would just be difficult to do visually and with other guests. Trying to put those pieces together, I think, is the arduous part.
Well, before you get to that, you guys are going to take the World is a Vampire tour on the road. I know you just played Australia shows a while back, and you talked about this being, this festival, this tour being a way of bringing people together, bringing that sense of community back. And I can't think of a better way to do that than with a concert, with a festival, with all sorts of people who have differing views, differing beliefs, all coming together to sort of celebrate one thing. And it's awesome that you want to bring that vibe back.
Well, that was so valuable for us with Lollapalooza Night 2, was it was a true alternative festival where you felt like, okay, even though there's all these different artists and all these different bands, whether it be George Clinton or the Beastie Boys or the Breeders, even Green Day was on some of those shows, you felt there was a sense of common voice that represented some form of an alternative community. Now, most festivals, have a lot of pop music involved, and I'm not here to disparage them. I'm about to play one, and I think it's totally fine. But I think particularly for young people, it's important that there are places that they can go where they see people who think like them, move like them, and are stars in their world. That's what people like Robert Smith and Ian McCulloch were for me when I was young. I realized that Robert Smith was not the same as, I don't know, Janet Jackson or something. Like, I got that point. But in my world, Robert Smith was a bigger star than Janet Jackson, even though the numbers would tell you different. I think those are important messages to send young people, that being yourself has a different value and it can be just as valuable in a different way. But with pop world, it's usually presented that there really is only one way.
And I think it's awesome, too, with a rock festival, you have all these people coming together. And then what you're doing is you're bringing some of your NAW wrestlers out as well. And being a fan of pro wrestling, there are people that even as an adult, they're like, really? You dig that stuff? You watch that stuff? And there's some time where people, are nervous that they're not going to find people that feel the same way about that stuff. So to be able to watch that at a show, too, is going to be huge.
Yeah, I think that the main point is this. What we've always tried to do with the Pumpkins is just celebrate, let's call it a form of diversity, not the one that's put on everybody's head. Diversity of opinion, diversity of idea, diversity of approach. And one of the things I love about professional wrestling is it still has an iconoclastic status in the world. It's still a bit underground. Just the fact that people have to ask themselves, do I like this, is not a bad thing. That's kind of good. You should want to rub up against things that make you uncomfortable, and you have to question your sanity for even being involved. And trust me, being in the NWA, running the company, I ask myself every day, am I insane? You know what I mean? To run a professional wrestling company on top of what is obviously a very robust and busy music life. But I love it because it's just different and fun. And so that's what's always attracted me.
Billy, I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys this summer on tour. Looking forward to possibly seeing this album performed live and getting to check out NWA for the first time at the Pine Knob Show coming up here later on this summer, man. I appreciate you taking some time, dude. I've been a huge fan for years, so thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.